We'll give it just one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. I see there are still people joining. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our participants today, wherever you are in the world, joining us for the 7th annual Breaking Barriers event organized and hosted by CRDF Global. My name is Susan King. I'm the chair of the Women in Science and Security Initiative. Breaking Barriers is an annual event to recognize women's contributions to science and security and be a space for developing next steps as a community. Oops. Our 2019 Breaking Barriers event resulted in the creation of a best practices guide for the advancement and inclusion of women in STEM and national security. Published in 2020, the guide explores barriers that women experience when pursuing careers in science and national security. The guide provides organizations with steps they can implement to foster more inclusive and diverse work environments. The guide is available in English, Arabic, and Russian, and is posted to CRDF Global's website. We encourage you to take a look and share this resource with your networks. This year, we are going global with our Breaking Barriers event series. CRDF Global's international offices in Amman, Jordan, and Kyiv, Ukraine are organizing their own events to promote women's advancement in STEM and national security in Eurasia and the Middle East, taking into account the unique cultural, political, and social contexts of these critical regions. We'll be featuring the results of all 3 events on our website, so please stay tuned for more information about these 2 events, in addition to information about this event that you're attending today. So we have an announcement that we would like to make. CRDF Global is absolutely thrilled to join Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy. GCNP is a leadership network that brings together heads of organizations in nuclear policy who are committed to break down gender barriers and gender equity. We look forward to working with GCNP membership to build network skills, mentorship, visibility, voice, and community among women working in national security. And as you can see in this photo, Laura Holgate and Michelle Dover's outreach efforts pre-pandemic indeed were very effective. On to today's event. The theme for Breaking Barriers 2021 is From Words to Action. We live in truly unprecedented times on so many fronts. In the US, women lead a record number of cabinet positions, with 11 women, many of whom are women of color, confirmed under the Biden administration. Girls thinking about careers in science and national security can see themselves in the faces of national leaders like never before. Of course, not everyone aspires to cabinet positions, but these women show you can break through the glass ceiling. You can aim higher and do more than ever before. The importance of positive role models is well documented. It's hard to be what you cannot see. The recent wave of diversity and inclusion initiatives and unprecedented levels of representation in the Biden administration present a unique opportunity to establish more equitable norms for women in science and national security fields. How do we build on the current momentum to drive sustainable improvement in both women's representation and inclusion? This virtual discussion will explore how you and your leadership can move beyond intentions and take concrete action to advance women's careers in science and security. And as you can see here, this is, of course, Kamala Harris, our Vice President in the United States, and all of those who preceded her. And you'll You'll notice that one of these is not the same. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Jill Hrube, a CRDF Global Board member. Jill was the director of Sandia National Laboratories from 2015 to 2017. She was the first woman to lead a national laboratory in the United States. She oversaw Sandia's broad national security missions in nuclear weapons, cyberspace, energy, nonproliferation, biological defense, and space sensors and systems. Her directorship was preceded by a 34-year distinguished career at the lab. The author of numerous publications, Ms. Hrube has received many awards for her service. Ms. Hrube was named the inaugural Sam Nunn Distinguished Fellow at the Nuclear Threat Initiative in 2018. Her work at NTI focused on this intersection of technology and nuclear nonproliferation policy. Ms. Hrube earned her bachelor's degree from Purdue University and her master's degree from the University of California at Berkeley, both in mechanical engineering. It is my pleasure to give the virtual floor to Jill Hrube. Jill, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thanks to CRDF Global for asking me to give this keynote and for sponsoring this important event. It's exciting to see it go global, and it's exciting to see you join the global champions in nuclear policy. So congratulations. I am going to do a 15-minute whirlwind discussion about my career and some of the things that I've learned in the course of my career that are specifically tailored to what it's like to be a woman in a STEM leadership position. So I start these talks by saying the most important career choice I made was becoming an engineer. And it was a hugely unlikely career choice. The numbers at the time that I joined the Purdue University engineering program is less than 5% women in engineering. And it changed, it has changed, but not by that much. It's sort of flattened out around 20%, especially mechanical engineering. And the truth is, I started Purdue as a math major. And because Purdue had an extremely dynamic and active women in engineering program, I ended up transferring into engineering as a sophomore at Purdue. It was a really good choice because throughout my career, I've used my engineering education to do many things that I've enjoyed greatly. But what I have learned over time is that women in engineering and in many fields of science get there by serendipity. And in fact, the degree of serendipity required is amazing to me. I talk to many young women today who say, well, I had this teacher I really liked, and I talked to him about a career in science or engineering, and they convinced me, blah, 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 blah. Or I happened to meet somebody's parent, and this is not sustainable. We are not going to get to 50% women in science and engineering through serendipity. So it's a area that I've given lots of thought to, and I'll come back to later in this talk. The second most important career decision I made was going to work at a security-focused national laboratory. These national laboratories, as many of you know in the United States, are an amazing place to do team science and engineering and work on problems that are important to our nation and to the world. What's considered important changes over time. It depends on our elected officials and our political bodies in the United States. But I would say I joined I joined Sandia, really I started working in the solar energy program, and I say the big push for renewable energy, the first big push for renewable energy. But the security part of the laboratory grew on me. The issues were an interesting mix of very hard, difficult science combined with policy. And I found that intersection quite fascinating, and I still do. And in part because I love engineering, but I like engineering for reasons more than just the design, build, test product piece. I like what engineers can do to change the world. So what kept me in the field was the challenging work and truthfully, the amazing people I had an opportunity to work with. I don't have time to talk about the work that I did in great detail, but let me give you a quick tour, a very quick tour of the things that I worked on over the course of my career. So I worked in a solar project called Solar Central Receivers, and I particularly led an activity to achieve very high temperatures so that we could do high temperature processing with solar energy. I worked on the Strategic Defense Initiative. I worked on nuclear weapons thermal analysis and later on nuclear weapon components and system integration. I worked on hydrogen storage, both for weapons and for automotive applications. I did a lot of work on material science and engineering science. I worked on micromechanical systems processing using synchrotron radiation. I worked on many homeland security issues, including emergency response, chemical decontamination, biological threats and detection, explosive detection and damage analysis, nuclear and radiological incident mitigation, and many more. And I worked on international arms control, treaties and agreements, and international cooperation on nuclear security. These fields, you could tell by the field probably who was president of the United States at the time. And it's one of the most interesting things I find about my career when I look back on it is how much what we do is influenced by what's important at the time. But the technical skills are always important, and the ability to learn new things was always present. Now I want to just dig in a little further to my experience about being a woman doing this kind of work. The first thing I would like to say is that technical credibility was a constant battle. And I think this resonates with a lot of people in the field. At Sandia, we used to call this our street cred. Despite the fact that I received many positive performance reviews, had a lot of success and received a lot of recognition, I felt that my technical credibility was always challenged and always needed to be proven. I got used to it. It didn't bother me. And in fact, I was quite confident that that it wouldn't take, it took less and less time to prove my technical credibility, but I like to move projects and do different things. And so I sort of set myself up for needing to reprove my technical credibility in some ways. But I think it's an issue that many women in science and the security fields face. There's other things I would like to say. That one is that I was asked within Sandia, and I think this is to the credit of the laboratory, to take on many special internal projects that provided me with not only visibility, but great experience and understanding how the laboratory really worked. Now, the bad news and the hesitation in all of this is these special assignments were almost always on top of the day job. So it required some extra work, but the extra work over time turned out to really be worth it in terms of establishing a deeper understanding of the system. I was also given lots of opportunities to lead projects and took most of them. I didn't take all of them. Some of them required substantial travel at times when I couldn't travel, when my children were young. But mostly I didn't talk about it very much, but I would be honest about I can't do that job the way I would like to do that job right now. But for the most part, I accepted the opportunities, and I was glad I did. And again, to the credit of the laboratory, my first level manager job was actually offered to me when I was at home doing childcare after the birth of my second daughter. The other thing I did was I sought outside activities anytime I started feeling like my horizons were too small within the laboratory. Examples of outside activities that I'm talking about include things like advisory committees for universities and for government agencies, national academy studies, journal editors, and things like this to really get deeply involved in the science and technology enterprise in the United States. It grew my understanding and it kept me from being insular with just a deep understanding of an institution. It expanded my horizons, and that was very good for me. And I would just say as my career advanced, I interacted more directly with the national security program managers in our country, largely in Washington, D.C., and represented Sandia's work more and more. And I found that I really enjoyed that. It took great pride in representing the work of the laboratory and trying to find ways to help national programs. And my approach in general, I would say, to find something really great to enjoy in every job. And I never focused on my next job. I always focused on the job that I had and how I could do it well. And it didn't mean that I didn't think about challenges that might be in my future, but I never focused on that. I always focused on making sure that I really loved the job that I was doing, and I almost always did. Lastly, I'll just say about this being a woman is that balancing work and family obligations was always present for me. I'm fond of saying I tried to keep a constant state of chaos. It required lots of energy but I judged things. If I thought my things in the family needed more attention, I shifted there. If I thought things at work needed more attention, I shifted there. But it was never calm. It was always, I felt at the time, and I still feel it was always right on the edge of chaos. But in the end, while it required lots of energy, it was always exciting. And I feel very comfortable about the successes I had, both in my family and work. But I won't mislead anybody to say, oh, you can balance this, it's no problem. It does require a lot of energy, and and it's not calm. It was, at least for me, a pretty chaotic environment most of the time. So here's some of the things I learned. The first, and I think the most important thing to me personally, is it is good to be honestly generous. I think that practicing grace and dignity is really important when you're being evaluated and judged by other people. I tried as much as I could and in every way I could to say all the positive things before I said, but here's an area I think we should improve, to anybody I talked to ever. And it became just the way I operate. I stopped thinking about it. But as I look back, because people remind me, this is the way you are. I think you should, I've lived by never miss an opportunity to say thank you, or to say that was a really good job. You shouldn't do it when you don't mean it, but you should never miss an opportunity. Try to give people, I think, the benefit of the doubt when they say something that you don't understand or you think isn't fair. But if it isn't right, you do need to call it out and talk about it. So give them the benefit of the doubt, but not too much. Don't overlook things. And I'll come back and talk about that in my final thoughts. The other thing that I would say that I learned was you should always be prepared to be awed by others. Nobody does things the way you do them, but sometimes they do them a lot better. And that's one of the things that I learned at first, especially in leadership positions. You ask people to do something and you think, why did they approach it that way? But on a regular basis, it was like, what a great idea. You know, I would have never thought of that. You did it completely different than I would have done it. And it's an interesting conclusion. So I just think that if you're going to work with other people or lead other people, you should be prepared to be surprised in the best way by the things that they do. A third thing is seek everyone's voice. People are all there for a reason. We work with people in groups for a reason. And if their voice isn't present, then it's a problem. So I think that learning to call on people and to make sure people are listened is really important. Not to make people uncomfortable, but to make sure their voice is at the table. So it takes, you know, this sort of fine line between, am I going to put them on the spot? Or do I really think they have something to say about this that they're hesitant to say? And if I ask them, they'll speak. And finding that place is important in a group dynamic. It's really important. I worked at finding my boundary, always knowing that here's where I was comfortable and going just a little bit beyond. It's energizing to go a little bit beyond. You have to be afraid not to fail. But of course you try to succeed. I love this saying, and I play it in my head a lot when I'm doing something that I feel is outside of my comfort zone. That's from a song, an old song by Guy Clark, that is spread your arms and hold your breath and always trust your cape. That's sort of, you know, be outside your comfort zone just a little bit and have faith that you're going to be able to do it. And then embrace and enjoy the diversity that teamwork brings. And I used to play through my head every day when I drove home from work. What did I learn today? What did I give back today? If you're doing both of those things, you're leading a good professional life. And of course, try to keep balance in your life in any way, in every way that's important to you. So let me just end with a couple of final thoughts. The change in the number of women and people of color in the culture of science and security is too slow. That's the theme of the meeting today. I've been involved in this field for a long time, and truthfully, I get more and more impatient. And I pride myself on patience, but the patient path is not getting us where we need to be. It's very, very slow. So things that I've changed as a result of this, I don't tolerate very well lame excuses anymore. Sorry just to be so blunt, but there are a lot of lame excuses that I've heard over the course of my career about people not being quite ready. There's just always, she's not quite ready. If we just give her one more assignment, for the most part, that is not true, and it's a different standard, and I don't accept it on its on face value anymore. I also, another example of what I consider a lame excuse now is the excuse, well, I was raised that way. I did that because that was the way I was raised. Well, let's see, we all change a lot over the course of our lives. We do lots of things that are different than the way we were raised, for better or worse. But the fact that you were raised that way is, I just consider now a lame excuse. Like, okay, times are changing, we're changing, you've changed as a person. I no longer accept that you can't think about this more deeply than the way you were raised. I also look for private teaching moments, and I mean this in like the sort of most generous way, like take in private to somebody, say, you know, that thing you said or that way you behaved made me a little uncomfortable and I didn't understand it, and explain why. And I have found that the success rate of this is near 100%. If you honestly, privately discuss with somebody the situation, they immediately say, oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way. And those can be, you know, one at a time, can be important things. I do think training in terms of understanding diversity is important. And this is a change that I've made over the course of my career. I've seen it really affect people. But it has to be done. It has to be very high quality. It has to improve not only the understanding of the situation, but feelings associated with it. Training can't be rushed. It can't be fast. It can't only be about numbers. It has to speak to people's hearts and souls. And it takes very high quality trainers to do that. And then finally, mentoring is important. I love the picture with Kamala Harris. It is important to see role models and for people to mentor other people. I mentor a tremendous number of people, as many as I can. I have other things, of course, that take time, but please help. All the men and women involved in this discussion can help mentor and can share their experiences. And I think that it's more important than you might realize. And so I will end there, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Jill Hruby, so much for sharing those pearls of wisdom. I really appreciated some of the takeaways, including love what you do. That's critically important. We spend a lot of time at work, so let's make sure that we love what we're doing and bringing our best selves to work each day. The myths of work-life balance, I too have come to that understanding. Sorry, everybody, it really does not exist. You just make it work, and that's just how it is. And it's very possible, but you just do your best to make it work. Practicing grace and dignity, honoring diversity, mentorship, all of those themes I think are foundational to the Breaking Barriers series, and I really appreciate you sharing your personal journey with us. So in the interest of time, I'm going to move forward to introducing our next moderator. Kathy DeMio is our new Chief Operating Officer at CRDF Global. We are absolutely delighted to welcome her to our organization and the leadership that she brings. Kathy has over 25 years of leadership experience in the biosecurity, life sciences, and health technology industries. Prior to joining CRDF Global, she served as president of Navitas Clinical Research and Navitas Life Sciences Enterprise. She oversaw clinical research delivery teams in the US, India, Russia, and Southeast Asia, as well as partnerships throughout Africa and South America. I'll limit my intro to her with that and turn the floor over to Kathy for moderation of the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Susan, for that warm welcome. I'm really so proud and grateful to have joined CRDF as of March 1st and to really join forces with this amazingly talented and passionate group of women and men and an environment that truly fosters support of women in science and security. And we're doing that both within our ranks as well as performing an important role as a leader, taking concrete action to advance gender diversity and equity in this region and throughout this whole arena of science and security. I'm also joined on this panel with other leaders in this area, and I would like to have each one of our distinguished panelists please take a few moments to provide their title and affiliation, a brief statement regarding your professional background, and if not already, as you're discussing this, how you have become involved in diversity and inclusivity initiatives and why you're passionate about it, and particularly in this arena. Perhaps we can start with Dr. Julie Fisher. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be part of this panel today. So I am also at CRDF Global, where I began working this July as a senior technical advisor for global health after a somewhat eccentric career in science and science policy. By training, I am a microbiologist, and my background is actually in bench sciences, where I worked in understanding the pathology of specific viruses, why some viruses cause rapid progression to disease in some individuals, but slow progression to disease in others, and focusing on understanding why vaccines do not have a uniform impact on preventing disease, and in fact, looking at the history of why poor vaccine design can actually enhance disease. I went from the bench to the AAAS Fellowship, which was an opportunity to come to Washington, D.C., and to work on the Hill to support a committee in the U.S. Senate. And I actually stayed as professional staff for 2 years after that on the Hill as a staff scientist. And then had the opportunity through another fellowship to learn more about policy analysis and to complement what I had learned about technical work, with the opportunity to work at the Stimson Center and with the Council on Foreign Relations to better understand how some of the decision making that is guided by technical decisions is developed and informed. And then after that, I went back to the world of public health, working on building laboratory capacity for high throughput, high quality diagnostic testing to support disease surveillance with the US CDC, and then moving from there to a range of academic positions at George Washington University, Georgetown University, and now in my role at CRDF Global, supporting capacity building to accelerate the abilities to prevent, detect, and respond effectively to emerging disease threats where they occur, before they become international crises, ideally. In terms of my interest in inclusion and diversity, I first became, obviously, as Dr. Ruby already said, one of the challenges is that as a woman in the sciences, one cannot help but be aware of biases built into the system. My technical expertise is in infectious diseases, where women are still a minority. Not quite the same minority as they are in some engineering and mathematical fields, but certainly the challenges of being taken seriously in a field of hard sciences were apparent to me from a very early phase in my career. And one of the areas that interested me most is where we begin by addressing some of the feelings of inadequacy, the challenges to technical competencies, the ability to stand forward for women in these fields and say, I have a right to the same technical capabilities, competencies, and voice as anyone else. And my feeling was that begins much earlier than graduate school. So my first involvement actually was in working in programs that addressed STEM learning, STEM competency, and STEM role models for middle school girls. I became involved with that as a postdoctoral research fellow in Seattle, and over time have been involved in different organizations that focused on enhancing STEM experiences and identifying STEM role models for young women starting in middle school and going all the way through college and the postgraduate experience. So I'm very happy to be here and look forward to addressing questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Very proud to have you here as well. Next, I'd like to kick it over to Nick Roth, the Director of the Nuclear Security Program at the Stimson Center. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm truly honored to be part of this panel, and thank you to CRDF Global for organizing it. My name is Nicholas Roth. I'm the director of the Nuclear Security Program at the Stimson Center. In that role, I'm also the director of the International Nuclear Security Forum, an international network of NGOs dedicated to strengthening nuclear security around the globe. Prior to my time at Stimson, I spent a number of years at the Harvard Kennedy School as a researcher working on nuclear security issues. And prior to that, I spent many years working in the NGO community in Washington, D.C. on a range of nuclear nonproliferation issues and arms control and related fuel cycle issues. And over the course of what's now near 20 years, I've seen a lot of inequities at many institutions over this period. When I was able to take over my own program at the Stimson Center, it was very important to me that I focus on making sure that my program was as diverse and inclusive and equitable as possible. And so, although we're a small program, I've really tried to implement a number of processes that help to do that. Developing a specific recruitment process that helps to eliminate my own bias and recruit as diverse a group as possible. Making the International Nuclear Security Forum, when I took it over about 6 months ago, trying to make that institution more diverse, more equitable, represent different types of voices in the nuclear security community. Making sure that within my program that I'm sharing credit with all of my colleagues as much as possible. There was already a comment about mentoring. Make sure I'm doing everything I can to mentor colleagues. And then most recently, and I'm very proud of this, the International Nuclear Security Forum became a member of the Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy Initiative, where we made specific commitments to how we would further our work in this area. And the reason this is important to me is that it's a moral issue, first of all. I recognize that I've benefited enormously from many different types of privilege throughout my career, and even before I started my career. And I think just as a simple matter of fairness, I want everyone to have the same opportunities that I have. But I also think it's a security issue. Any organization where personnel feel alienated or marginalized has issues in its organizational culture that could weaken security culture and potentially lead to a security incident. And in the nuclear field, that could be catastrophic. And I think this needs to be a growing area where the nuclear security field looks, is not just is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is both a moral issue, but there are real policy consequences that can come from organizations that are not diverse, that are not inclusive, and that are not equitable, and that there can be benefits to creating those types of environments and institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's very important words of wisdom regarding fairness and morality, but also the real consequences of not having the diversity that we're all seeking and trying to achieve through action here today. Also joining us is Simone Williams. Would you kindly introduce yourself, please?
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Simone Williams. I am a program manager at the Leadership Council for Women and National Security. Prior to that, I was a program manager and research associate for the Project on Nuclear Issues at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where we did a lot of work on sustaining the pipeline and helping to provide developmental opportunities for young professionals in nuclear security. In addition to my work that I did with Pony, I was also an editor on the Represent article series, which was a part of the International Security Program DEI action plan to be able to provide a platform to highlight the importance of diversity in national security and to provide a place for diverse thought and voices to be able to share. In addition to all of that, I also participate with Orgs in Solidarity through the WCAPS initiative as a co-chair, co-leading the elevating voices of BIPOC voices in the media. And so that's what I do in my professional capacity, and I look forward to my work at LC Wins to help advance gender inclusion in national security and leadership roles. But at the end of the day, I feel, upon reflecting, I've seen that DEI efforts have been a part of my entire life, whether it's through formal or informal capacity, mostly in the theme of mentorship, which a lot of the previous panelists and Dr. Huberby has mentioned as well. I really do think mentorship is an important way for us to be able to start taking actionable steps towards diversity and inclusion. But at the end of the day, I'm passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion because for me, I do believe that we all need to have a fair chance. It's also, as it pertains to the work that we all do, I want to make sure that we are not only providing a place for diverse voices, but to also make sure that we're reflecting the diversity of our country and truly making sure that we're providing equal opportunity to everyone to share that voice. And when I say diversity, I mean it in all its spectrum, whether it is ethnic diversity, gender diversity, political affiliation. At the end of the day, diversity comes in many facets, and we need to make sure that we're including that when we think through DEI efforts.
Thank you so much for that background. Also joining us is Erin Connolly. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited for the conversation. And my name is Erin Connolly. I'm currently a master's candidate at the Kroc Institute of International Peace at the University of Notre Dame, but I'm also an associate program director with Girl Security. And so my experience in national security began through nuclear nonproliferation. And I was struck by the communities surrounding the issue, but also the lack of diversity. And as Simone just mentioned, to me, diversity is much more than gender. It's racial, socioeconomic, and experience. And this frustration and the lack of awareness among decision makers in the United States, particularly Congress, led me and a colleague who I believe is on the call, Kate Hewitt, to start an education project where we spoke to high school students about these issues because they're aware of them and they're ready to engage. It's just no one's doing it. And this work led me to Girl Security. And so Girl Security is a nonprofit that seeks to close the gender gap in national security through learning, training, and mentorship support. And so diversity is really at the center of what we do. And we believe that engaging girls is critical to the future of our security. And national security itself is a concept that was only created in the early 20th century, and it's historically been defined by a homogenous group of men. And so by empowering girls and gender minorities to redefine the definition based on their personal experiences, I think we'll be better suited to meet evolving threats, but also really, as also Simone said, like represent the interests of America across the United States. And so we work with girls and gender minorities across the United States. We work with partners like the Girl Scouts, the Naval Sea Cadets, in local communities, but also in the national security community like Gender Champions and Nuclear Policy. And so we're really focused on bridging the gap between the policy world and students. And this is a critical part of broadening the pipeline to step outside Washington, D.C. and a lot of the traditional areas of privilege, as Nick mentioned, and increase access to mentorship. And I know it's come up quite a bit on this panel, but mentorship is quite critical, and we see it as an opportunity to help someone ask better questions of themselves. It's not about our values or our ideas, it's about helping another person grow. And I think that is critically important in our space. And so we're really focused on giving girls the tools to succeed, whether or not they pursue a career in national security, because I think another part of the diversity and national security conversation is that it's not just one field, it's a myriad of things. It's, yes, cyber and nuclear policy, but there's also national security opportunities across the United States. It's not just DC, and so that's something that we're also working on. I will leave it there, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Erin. Well, as I think you can all see, we have an incredible group of panelists here today, and I'd like to go through a few questions, and we can also open it up for a few as well. I'd like to start with what obstacles have you identified in shifting gender diversity and equity work from words to action? What do you feel are the gaps that still need to be addressed? And actually, why don't we start with you, Erin? It sounds like you've had a lot of engagement with a lot of different types of groups. What are you still seeing as some of the areas of gaps that we might want to be addressing?
Thank you. That's a really great question. I think one of the first obstacles is a lack of data. It's really hard to understand why people are leaving the field or why it's so hard to increase the diversity of those who are entering. And so I think that's definitely one obstacle. And also creating opportunities. We need to increase awareness about the various pathways into national security. STEM is incredibly important. And as Dr. Ruby pointed out, there are many ways that you can engage with national security through STEM, but you can also engage with it if you majored in history. If you're a high school teacher, there are ways that you can integrate this into your everyday work. And increase the pathways and opportunities so that it doesn't require you to live in Washington, D.C., because I think that's also an equity issue that we're facing. And then the last thing I would say for an obstacle, I think we really need to increase our civics education. National security is increasingly personal, especially for high school students who are on the front lines of issues like disinformation. We need to prepare them with the tools that they're already engaging in the threat environment for.
Nicholas, would you mind extending on this a little bit further as well? It sounds like you've put a lot of things into place in the Stimson Center environment and looking at removing bias and also trying to address gaps in programs. What other areas are you finding at this time that there are still some obstacles or gaps and potential ways of addressing those?
So I think there are a number of things that NGOs can do. One, sometimes I think the overwhelming nature of lack of diversity in society might make it seem for some institutions as an overwhelming problem, and instead of and then sometimes using that as an excuse not to do as much as organizations can. So I think one important thing is to break down what needs to be done into smaller pieces and to rethink structurally how organizations function. Do silos exist? Does the capacity exist to initiate what might be some fairly straightforward initiatives? I think another element is the resources and in the incentive structure for creating more equitable and diverse organizations. I think organizations or organizations funders really need to create incentives to encourage organizations to be more diverse and equitable and inclusive. And then organizations have to put real resources into making that happen. And in addition to which, looking at structurally, is the organization doing everything it can to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Thank you. Perhaps, Julie, could you help us understand, as government and non-governmental organizations prioritize gender diversity through public statements and commitments, what do you view as some of the additional steps that can be taken and that you would personally like to see in, we've talked about some of the data we need, the programs, the incentives, some good ideas from Nick as well. What else do you see as areas in which we can make further action?
Thank you. It's a really good question. And I think I'd like to take that one somewhat from the national level in the US, but I think it's a global challenge as well. And that's for those of us who are looking at combining careers in science and security, there's a giant structural challenge that the years when there is the most, where the professional development stakes are the highest, and whereas there is the most pressure to demonstrate measurable success in terms of publications, in terms of active research work, whether it's at the bench, in the field, or through highly collaborative efforts. There's this enormous pressure to produce right in the middle of the time in one's life in which family pressures are also likely to be high. And that's something we've certainly seen exacerbated during the pandemic. It's already been touched upon. There's really no such thing as work-life balance. It's all a matter of juggling actively, recognizing that there will be many things in the air at one time and trying to catch those that break first, and accepting that some of them will fall. But to try to address some of those in a more structural way, I think coming out of this pandemic, for both science fields and for the academic disciplines that tend to foster leadership in national, I think that one of the most important things we can do is recognize that there is more than one way to these pathways, and giving people extraordinarily tight deadlines to demonstrate competence is not serving our safety, it's not serving our science, and it's not serving our security. And I think that that's going to be true moving forward if we wish to truly come out of the current situation in a way that recognizes equity and diversity and inclusivity for women. We have to recognize that we don't have to do things the way they've always been done. We don't have to put the timelines for success on an artificial scale. And I think we should also recognize it as we're moving toward decolonizing, decolonialism in science, that the value of collaborations built can be recognized as a measure of professional development and success, in addition just to those more easily recognizable milestones of publications, of speakerships, of the places that people stand out as individuals. Honestly, rewarding those is important, but we accomplish so much more through collaboration, thinking more carefully in our institutions and at the national level through granting mechanisms of how we recognize collaborations, team building, and success that spread across collaborative groups and even across borders, rather than only individual success when we're looking at professional rewards and recognition. It's the only way we're going to get senior people into positions who recognize the value of that teamwork to keep moving forward.
And just to tie to that a little bit further, Julie, about the broader DEI efforts, you mentioned about the global community and certainly bringing together people of different minds, and like, I got muted, I'm back, I think. Just broader DEI initiatives and how you can see that extending to that area. And then I'd like to open that up to other panelists, including Simone as well.
I think one of the things that has become clear working at the intersection of science and security is that, again, there's an African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That we succeed when we give ourselves the time to listen to each other, when we're doing capacity building, when we're looking, whether it's analyzing gaps, finding vulnerabilities, identifying ways to strengthen systems for safety, for science, for security. We learn the most when we give ourselves time to listen and to build teams. And I think that has been, that's a place where in the world of capacity building, in the world of science and security, it's recognized that that's a benefit, but we also really struggle with how to set milestones, reward success, recognize that very aspect of long-term partnership and trust building is a really important outcome. So I think part of that is trying to, in all of our work, trying to voice the importance of alliances and collaborations, and really try to build to the point where those are recognized as valuable outputs and outcomes, and that we build in professional development recognition around alliance building, because honestly, it's the trust in I always hate to say now how long I've been in this field because it's disturbing to say out loud, but it's the networks that you build, the people that you come back to again and again, that are most important from a personal professional development standpoint, and from the ability to build long-term successes to make the world a safer and more secure place. So I think we have to get past we reward people for what they do alone and start recognizing from a development standpoint and from a team building standpoint that collaborative piece is essential for all of us for success.
Thank you, Julie. Simone, if you can maybe touch a little bit further on any particular obstacles or barriers you're seeing, and then also how gender diversity and equity initiatives in your mind can also connect to this broader DEI work, especially related to racial and ethnic diversity as well.
Yes, thank you for the question, Kathy. So one of the biggest obstacles, I guess, that I see is the lack of reflection on the culture that we're in. So whether that's the institution you're in, the overall national security culture, whatever it is, recognizing that that is not a culture that's fit for these efforts that we're trying to get in place, means that you have to also be open to change. Change is hard, but change is also inevitable, and change is necessary in order for us to get these efforts through. I'll also add that I think it's important for us to not think of diversity, equity, and inclusion issues as separate. Too often we think of them as sideline issues or an issue that is for the moment. And I know we're talking today about bringing words to action, meaning how do we maintain this momentum and how do we keep it going? But like, that's exactly the point. We bring it together with we bring it together with whatever your mission is, right? It is not a sideline issue. It's not an issue you pivot to for the moment. It's not an issue that you only look to in some occasions. So with that in mind, how do you think through, as I mentioned, changing your culture to adapt, but like, how do you make sure that you're fully incorporating and engaging in these issues through all your work? And then to your question on what are some initiatives that we should be considering? At the end of the day, I also, like, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, like, it's not just one set of diversity issues over another. We shouldn't just be lending our lens to just one fill in the blank identity. We need to be inclusive of all. And with that, we need to be able to learn how to think through these issues at the intersectionality of them, because we can take the opportunity to look at issues, let's say for women, and then we can look over here in one corner and look at issues for Black individuals. But at the end of the day, you're missing that opportunity of that intersection to where you may have identified solutions for the individual identities, but at the same time, there's also different issue sets that a Black woman can face. So like recognizing that the importance of intersectionality. So at the end of the day, I guess what I'm trying to get across is we have to learn how to chew gum and walk. Like, we are capable of doing multiple things, and that's what we have to do. And it's challenging and hard work. It is going to force change, but it's something that we need to do in order to make ourselves better.
Thank you for that. I like that. And that tees us up well for some of the breakout sessions that are going to come up a little bit later in terms of intersectionality and doing more than one thing at one time. There's a lot of ground to cover for sure, but certainly the strategies in one area may be very important and helpful for others, and we really need to look for those opportunities. COVID-19 has really changed the landscape of our work environment, for better or worse in some cases. And I'd like your thoughts. I'm not sure who'd like to take this question in terms of how we see carrying those things forward, what impact it will have in an ongoing way on women in science and security, positive, negative, or otherwise. I'm curious in your own environments where you've seen these effects and what best practices and what barriers we think we might find going forward. Perhaps Julie?
Yeah, I'll take a very quick, a brief hack at this and then turn over to my colleagues. I mean, I think one of the things that has been most obvious is the impact of COVID-19, particularly on women in the workplace as we are trying to work from home and often care for family at home at the same time, whether it's caring for children, caring for other family members, has put a tremendous burden that is particularly difficult on women, again, in academic, technical, and high impact fields where it's often difficult to work out of the home and where the expectations have been incredibly hard to meet. That said, I think the positive that could come out of this is that we have all learned to engage as we are engaging now through our little screens. We have become comfortable interacting and forging new partnerships through the medium of virtual interaction, which takes away some of the barriers to participating in international security events. I mean, one of the big challenges, I am the recent previous chair of the Global Health Security Agenda, which is a voluntary partnership of non-governmental institutions that support efforts to build capacities to prevent, detect, and respond to emerging disease outbreaks worldwide. And one of our big challenges, particularly in getting engagement of younger researchers, younger scientists, and younger global health security experts has been the lack of resources for them to participate in international meetings where so much of the dialogue takes place and so many of the norms are forged. When we're interacting like this virtually, we do take away some of those barriers and allow more inclusiveness simply by taking away the cost barriers to participation. So I think coming out of this, my fear is that there's been damage done to a lot of women's careers that will take years or perhaps not be amenable to being addressed easily at all. But that the plus is that we've learned to participate in meetings and engage each other in a way that takes away some of the obstacles for those who would like to participate by just meaning we don't have to get on a plane to have a conversation.
Yes, I think that's very important. While we can see the negatives and there may be some impact in terms of, women at home with families or even men at home with families, candidly, in terms of impact on careers or so forth, I've been really encouraged by forums of this type and the ability for people who might not otherwise have been able to join, to have that opportunity and to really make fantastic connections around the globe. Any final words from any of the panelists? I think we have just a couple more minutes. We can have a final word from each of you if you'd like, or we can also open it up to questions.
I was just going to hop in really quickly on the
Please.
COVID-19 question. And I wanted to add that this, I think, is a really key moment of inflection for the field, because we saw how flexibility can help increase the ability to participate in various meetings like this, which is wonderful, but also that flexible schedules are just not enough, because we saw millions of women leave the workforce, and we need to look at other ways in which the institutions can better support work-life balance and understanding that we're also human and we have these outside work commitments. And so I think getting muted. I think a big step to this is paying women fairly so that they can pay for childcare if that's necessary, or other understanding that COVID-19, I think, laid bare a lot of the inequalities in the field that we're still really struggling against, and it's an opportunity to really dive in to meet those challenges.
Thank you for that, Erin. Nicholas, any other final comments? Or Simone?
I can just give a quick response to the COVID-19 question. I think there's going to be a lot of benefits to what we've learned from COVID-19 through more flexible work hours, more flexibility from working from home. But what I think two things that I think we need to be cautious about. One is, as we think about these new structures and processes, making sure that we're not reinforcing inequities in the system. So if people are working from home, that might minimize opportunities for them to be on the inside circle in whatever organization they're working for. So making sure, and if you're already not in that circle, it might make things even more difficult for you. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I think is really important is, I think in the professional space over the last year, there's been a discussion of mental health issues that has never really taken, that has just really started. And I'm thinking more about providing accommodations for those with mental health issues, for those with disabilities. COVID-19 is really, when you look at the impact, employment impact for those with mental health issues and disabilities, it's been significant. So thinking about trying to hold on to some of the lessons and expand on some of the lessons that we've learned during COVID-19.
Thank you very much for that. I think we're just about at time, but I did want to say that I think so many of these concepts bringing together how we really define diversity and inclusion, how we really look at the gender equity related issues, how we learn the lessons of the past year especially. It sounds like we've had a lot of great ideas that have come out of both the positive and the negative experiences that we've all faced over the past year. In many ways, it's brought us closer together. In some ways, it's put some barrier in there that we need to be extremely mindful of. And it's also put it in the backdrop or context of the fact that these issues that we're trying to confront with gender equity, as well as all diversity and inclusion initiatives, also have to be balanced in a really, can be done in a very good way in terms of employee wellness as well. It's paying attention to the whole person. We're people before we come to work, and we're people as we interact with each other, and we bring those diverse experiences, ideas, and unique characteristics of each and every one of us that we can bring to that environment. So I want to again thank everyone on the panel here, and I'll turn it back to our moderators to see if there are any other questions for this group. Thank you for the opportunity.